At the end of the fourth test at Emirates Old Trafford, it's time for Ask George. First questions from Daniel Chapman.
Are we doing this in different voices?
No.
Okay. There was some talk I might do each answer in a different impression, which I quite wanted to do, but the botch obviously doesn't. Can I do one? Is he in both of them?
Does this rain unfortunately mean that once again we have to avoid Ashes series?
I like the way you're thinking. Yes. You know what? That whole thing with Stuart Broad, I knew what he meant. He actually said in his mind it was void, and it's kind of reasonable because it was a rubbish series. There was no preparation. It was just played to get the broadcast deal done. I knew where he was coming from. He just was logicizing it, is that a word, in his head to deal with it. And I get what he's coming from. And I think it was taken slightly out of context. This is just an unfortunate end to brilliant, denouement to the Ashes anyway. It's been brilliant. It's absolutely a valid result. It happens, and it's a bit of a bugger.
Tom asks, should there be a reserve day like the World Test Championship to encourage the results, or why don't we have an extra hour on days when the weather is good and the weather forecast is so bad?
There's a lot in there. I don't think we want reserve days. I mean, we know it's 5 days. Playing for a draw is a legitimate tactic. The whole thing would be different if you thought it was 6 days or whatever. And also the practicalities of it are very, very trying. The broadcasters wouldn't want that. All the costs associated with it, the fact that tours are condensed. That isn't the direction of travel of Test cricket. If anything, it'll be 4 days. So I don't think that's an issue. Could there be different regs? Yeah, they've got to do something about getting the overs in. Maybe they should play on longer. Maybe they should sometimes start a wee bit earlier. There are all sorts of things, rather, the game could do to be a bit more flexible. But there aren't always easy answers. Had they started earlier today, it's pretty hard to get around, to get here, isn't it, before 11 o'clock in Manchester on public transport. All sorts of issues, but should there be a bit more flexibility? Sure, there should, yeah.
Natty asks, can we get serious about putting a retractable roof on grounds in the UK?
Well, I don't know if they're mocking me or not, but yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the converted here. They've talked about it here. What are they? Graphite. Apparently, Manchester is a bit of a graphite.
Graphene, I think.
I think you're right. I think actually that's what I know. I'd have ordered the wrong thing. It would have been a catastrophe. But I don't think anyone's going to put me in charge of a retractable roof. But yeah, I think the only place you could do it at Lords. I think there might be another question on that. Yeah.
Yes, from Curran. That's George. How many roofs could we get built if anyone listened to your plan to sell Lords, which I think you said would be about 2 billion?
3. They've had it valued. I'm not making that up. The MCC had Lords valued at £3 billion. How many roofs do you want? You had one. That was based on only building, by the way, on the stand imprint. You've obviously got houses at either end, or you've got the tunnels at the nursery end. You're not building on the grass at Lords, You're not building on the pitch. You're not changing the long room. Look, if I could change one thing in cricket, it would be getting rid of tradition. Tradition's fine, but until it stands in the way. And Lords has moved twice before, hasn't it? This is the third Lords. And if you could move it to something better, and I absolutely believe it's possible to sell Lords and build on the footprint for the Winter Wonderland in Hyde Park. I have seen some outline plans. Of course, getting planning permission would be a monumental struggle. Of course it would. But it is possible. I don't think it's going to happen because I think some people are absolutely wed to tradition. But you know what else is traditional? Smallpox and child labour and all sorts of other rubbish things. And sometimes you've got to move on. And Lords is terrific. I love Lords. But if you could do something better and safeguard the game's future for a long time and that club's future, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that really make it the home of cricket? Wouldn't it really make it a world leader? I'm just ranting now. But I think, look, I don't know whether the question is mocking me or not, but I don't think it's that ridiculous to have a conversation about doing things a little bit differently. That's how progress happens, surely.
John Wallace Howell asks, how big a failure is it to not win 4 Ashes series with Broad, Anderson, Stokes and Root?
Is it 4? That's a good point. I don't know if I'd think of it in those terms. I mean, I think the general standard of Australian cricket, the base level is nearly always higher than the base level of English cricket. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, not least their climate. They play outdoors, they're bigger. In a lot of ways, they're a hell of an opponent. They have a lot of respect for Australian cricket, much as I hate to admit it in a way. But is it a failure? I don't know. It's a really good Australian team. It's no disgrace to lose to them at all, and I actually think that England it's been terribly even, hasn't it? The last 2 tests, England have looked the better side. Could easily be 2-2. I don't know, it doesn't feel disgraceful, embarrassing, or I can't remember what the word was, a failure at all, really.
Well, Josh Owen sticks with that theme. With England now heading into 10 years since winning the Ashes, does this period need to be seen along with the 90s?
Well, I don't think so, but I take the point. But I mean, in the last 10 years, well, if you go back 13 years, England have won, 4 global trophies. T20 World Cup twice, the 50-over World Cup and the World Test Championship. Pretty bloody good, eh? So, no, the 90s were grim. I don't know how old you are, whether you lived through the 90s. The 90s were really bloody grim, and there was no expectation. This team is full of joy and fun, and, they're doing amazing things. They've done amazing things like the wins in Pakistan, for example. The win in South Africa was very impressive. The win in Sri Lanka, 2 wins in Sri Lanka, were very, very impressive. They've done all sorts of very good things, and it rained, and now it's 2-1 when it might have been 2-2. I don't know. I wouldn't overreact, really. There is a point in there, of course. It's going to be 10 years without an Ashes win at least, and that's if you think they can win in Australia, which is real tough. And there are lots of issues in English cricket which we shouldn't allow the rain to blind us to. I don't know whether today is the day to talk about that, but I take the point you're making, and it's a fair point, but it's not like the 90s, I don't think. You won't remember the 90s.
No, sorry. I was, 3 at the end of the 90s, so cricket was a little bit off my radar. Stevie...
My shoes are older than you.
Yeah. Stevie asks, did England waste time on the evening of day 2 and morning of day 3 by not just having a massive swing so they could have 70-plus overs at Australia by the end of day 3?
I mean, didn't they score 66 in 49 balls? The last wicket. I mean, didn't Zach Crawley score the quickest 150 in history at this ground? Or wasn't it the 3rd quickest 500 in Test history? It just rained for 2 days, mate. It just rained a lot. I mean, yeah, you could be. I didn't think it was unreasonable. Had they not had that partnership, Australia would have been ahead, wouldn't they? When the rain came, it just rained.
Was there anything in the partnership that Stokes and Brooke had on that morning where Brooke wasn't scoring slowly, but wasn't perhaps as quick as other people were seeming to thrash it about a bit?
Stokes and Brooke? Want them to go quicker? I mean, they were trying. The opposition are allowed to be quite good. And the ball got soft and the pitch was slow and they bowled fairly negatively, and I haven't got any criticisms, really.
Will Cooling asks, were the Ashes lost by bizarre tactics at Edgbaston, not due to bad weather in Manchester? Everyone knew the Aussies kept the urn with a draw, hence why getting on the front foot was so important.
So, I think the point I'd want to make most of all is that Australia retained it because they're really good. I honestly think they deserve a lot of credit. This is a very, very good Australia side. World Test champions a few weeks ago. So I'd want to start with that point, that they deserve credit. But of course, Will, there are lots of factors, and that's only one of them. And yes, you could look back at the selection. Jonny Bairstow basically has rounded on his critics by saying, you were right, I wasn't fit. Equally, they dropped lots of catches, they bowled lots of no balls, they didn't look ready coming into the series, they made an unusual, hubristic declaration maybe at Edgbaston. I don't know, it's a combination of all those things. And it rained here. All those things, eh?
And finally, Sushant asks, on the basis of his interview, how was Jonny Bairstow passed by the medical team to keep?
Well, they've made an error of judgment, I suspect, is how we look back at that. I do feel for him a bit, because I thought that by the time that Ed Myth started screwing him and Moen around to make space for Joss Buttler, he had become a very reliable keeper. He had gone from being far from that, to a really reliable keeper and very good with the bat. And they messed him around. He lost confidence with the bat, and now he's suddenly come back with the gloves, having not done it regularly for 3 years or whatever it is, and he's struggling. Well, of course he is, and he's struggling. So I feel for him a bit. But the question you raised, was he fit to do it? No, he wasn't, and it's really hurt them. And I'd have picked him as a batter. Don't want to be wise after the event. I did say that. I said I'd have dropped Zach Crawley. He's got 189 here. What the hell do I know? You make these decisions. Sometimes you get the right, sometimes you get the wrong, and I don't necessarily think they are right or wrong. Look, happy Australians behind us. That's the Australian media. Happy Australians. It's not my most favourite thing. Anyway, So it was a gamble and it didn't work. But had they not done that, they'd have had to gamble in another area, wouldn't they? They'd have had to drop somebody, Brooke or Crawley or Pope or whatever. So easy to be wise after the event, but I think they probably did get that one wrong.